Hello and welcome to Business Reporter's Fraud Prevention Campaign. I'm Alastair Greener. As part of the EU's revised Payment Services Directive, PSD2, which aims to give a leg up to fintechs offering innovative digital services, companies must start implementing strong customer authentication, or SCA, in order to enhance consumer data protection against both existing and emerging types of fraud. While currently only transactions posing a high risk require additional authentication, from September 2019, the vast majority of electronic payments will require two-factor authentication, with only an anticipated 5% being exempted. With me in the studio is e-commerce fraud expert John Marsden to talk us through how banks, merchants and payment service providers can meet the challenge that tightening regulations present without undermining the ultimate rationale behind any fintech innovation: better customer service. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, does PSD2 help e-commerce?
Fundamentally, yes. The headline is to protect and move us forward into a more competitive environment where people are secure and the fraud is stamped out of those high-risk transactions. So yes, PSD2 is a real good framework to move forward and build on our ability to do commerce electronically.
In the introduction, we talked about SCA, but perhaps you could explain it in more detail to us.
Sure, absolutely. So secure customer authentication means that an individual, and there's now a standard for this, is able to authorise a transaction through the use of technology in real time. This means that the individual is aware that that transaction is taking place. They have an ability to deny the transaction. So the individual themselves is looking after their own account, if you like. It does involve technology to be able to get that message securely to the individual, to sign that transaction, to dynamically link that intervention with the individual back to the transaction. But essentially, it's about security where it's needed.
And what impact do you think that's going to have on e-commerce, bringing in this change?
This is a huge issue. So friction is the main concern of those e-commerce merchants, where abandonment has been an issue. What do I mean by abandonment? So you go through a shopping journey. Let's give you an example. If you're running around in the morning, you're trying to sort out a present maybe for your mother for Mother's Day, and your children are screaming at you, and you quickly log in, you try and do the transaction as quickly as possible, and then suddenly you have to go and find your mobile device to authorise it, which might be in the car, it might be upstairs. Do you really have the time to do that? And that's their main concern. You will not complete the transaction. We will not follow through with the SCA, the authorization of the transaction, and it will drop off. We've seen parallels in the introduction of this 3D Secure, the way the card schemes pop up a box for you as a consumer to authorize. People were saying that was 15 to 20% shopping cart abandonment was caused by 3D Secure. So you can see the concern when we enter into an environment where the individual has to interact on a separate channel to authorise that transaction. Is it just dropped? Is it forgotten about? Is it 15 to 20%? Is it higher? And that's a lot of revenue for the businesses. I think also the personal cost in terms of your own investment, getting to those final stages of the purchase and then having to start again at a later date or forgetting about the purchase. For an individual, we need some adaptation to be able to expect and follow through on our actions.
What exceptions does PSD2 allow?
They've thought about risk and very much where there's a lower risk to the transaction or a lower risk to the purchase or the merchant or the payment instruction, you're able to leverage higher values before SCA kicks in, which is enticing. So that is the major exception. There are also exceptions for recurring transactions. For example, you don't really want to, go to your monthly subscription and authorise it on a monthly basis. So there's those sort of exemptions in play to make life easier for the adoption of SCA.
You talked about the whole experience being frictionless earlier on. This clearly probably isn't going to make it as frictionless as, the consumers and the financial e-commerce organisations would actually want.
Absolutely. Although we all have an ability and a need to control our fraud rates, without the regulation that's coming down from PSD2, would we do this measure? Maybe. But certainly it gives us a flat playing field across all payment service providers, across all merchants, where this is going to happen. And it is for the greater good. It is to protect us from these huge losses from fraud in e-com.
But is there anything that you can do to make it less frictionless for what would be perceived as trustworthy clients?
Absolutely. So we've got the transactional risk assessment. So we need to understand the risks of the transaction, and that's not only what's being purchased or who it's being purchased off. What about the connection? What about the device being used? And this is very much where iovation play. We're able to see that device, see its reputation, where it's connected from, what anomalies are coming through. Is it looking like a fraudulent transaction? To advise someone whether there is higher risk, lower risk, and whether that should then go to SCA. And equally, a merchant themselves, an e-commerce merchant, is able to manage their own exposure to risk by being mindful of the whole environment that transaction is taking place in. That enables them to drop friction out of the process. It enables them to take advantage of those exceptions, which inevitably means more money through their checkout.
You talked just then about reputation and recognition. What's the difference when it comes to e-commerce and trustworthiness?
They're intrinsically linked. So if I can uniquely identify a device, I then can track it through a huge, I'm talking about iovation's network, with 6 billion devices known to us, 66 million fraud reports on those devices. That gives us the intelligence to understand that unique device's reputation. Reporting on its reputation is massively important. The way people behave on their devices, how that device is interacted with other businesses, tells you how it's going to behave predictively to any business. Massively important. So the difference, they're intrinsically linked. Unless you can do great recognition, and I would do that without a person involved, it needs to be on that vector of the device. By doing that across a huge network of deployments, you're able to understand the reputation of that device. And both are absolutely intrinsic in being able to see the full picture when it comes to an e-commerce transaction.
And once you've got that reputation, how do you then translate that into trustworthiness so that you can actually assess the financial risk?
Absolutely. So the trick of our service is being able to take that vast amount of information, whether that be from our network or the observations of that particular device, that particular connection, and turn it into usable intelligence. Our customers control what they consider risk and what they consider not risk through a set of business rules. But essentially, the intelligence is there and the technology is there to enable them to make a clear decision: yes, no, or let's look at this transaction.
Now, iovation's got quite a strong product suite, lots of different products
Sure.
in there which are helping. Perhaps you could talk us through how they all operate and how they work.
Absolutely. It really is aligned around the PSD2 principles, the principles of saving, observing and stopping fraud are key to what we do. So essentially, the core products is about recognition and reputation. From recognition and reputation, you can bind for authentication. So, for example, if you use your bank account with the same machine from the same connection, and there's nothing really different in that than we've seen 1,000,001 times before, then actually we're authenticating you. We are saying this is something you have in your, and the reputation of that device is good. So moving that forward, once you understand the context of the transaction, you're able to raise SCA, the multi-factor authentication elements of SCA, in the right way. Being able to adapt to the risk you see depends on how much we ask you for, how much we ask you to sign, how much we ask you to give in terms of friction to that transaction. High risk equals higher friction.
How have you managed to see so many of the world's devices? How have you done that?
Sure. The business has been around for 14 years. We were born out of an e-com business in the first place. We have about 35,000 brands who use our technology to protect themselves today, and this is prior to PSD2, our members contribute to our joint understanding of the world's Internet of Things.
So tell us, how effective are your solutions? How do you measure that success? Perhaps you've got some figures, some metrics for us.
Absolutely. I'm very proud of what we do for our clients, and they measure, and certainly most businesses measure, return on investment. So the latest Tech Validate stats that we have, which is open to the world to contribute, we don't control the way who contributes to those statistics. Quote, things like 98% of our clients see a return on investment within 1 year. Others are seeing extreme investment, sort of 100% within 3 months. And it depends on the industry, it depends what they're doing, and equally how good they are at measuring their returns. But essentially, we, because of our effectiveness, our ability, our precision, our understanding, and our intelligence, are able to leverage that to save our clients money, but more importantly, allow those good customers access to their services.
We've talked a lot about the regulations changing, the fact that we can't get away from them, but we're still trying to make all e-commerce frictionless. For our viewers watching today, what 3 key takeaways would you like them to remember from this interview?
I've got to put this as number 1, which is customer experience is king. That's why we've seen fintechs move into traditional spaces. That's why we're seeing innovation. For example, Uber's taken over from taxis. Why? Because it's easy, it's convenient, and digital is allowing us that the ability to serve our consumers in a better way. Number 2 is PSD2 is coming. It's great legislation to protect us for the future. It opens up all sorts of avenues for new payment mechanisms. So we have to accept that we need to be ready for September. And number 3, in this whole mix, the device, the endpoint, the connecting piece of equipment is key. Why? Credentials are being compromised wholesale. We have thousands of identities for sale, thousands of passwords for sale, thousands of access to email for sale. And technologically, the fraudsters are able to manipulate, to hide, to disguise. So having technology such as iovation enables you to stay ahead of the game, protect your business, protect your consumers' data, protect the e-commerce environment, which we all need to thrive and survive.
Well, it's great to be updated with the latest news about how technology can help us to deal with all of the new regulations coming to us. So it's been great finding out more. John Marsden from iovation, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Alastair.